Hello and welcome to the Dr. Kirsten Show. I'm your host, Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen, and today I have a guest with me, Kiona Nessenbaum. She is going to introduce herself because she has quite a history as far as working with birth and birthing people, and I'm very, very excited to get to explore this topic a little bit more because we were just talking briefly about it right before we hit record, and we like just speaking and talking to birth stories and taking a look, I think, behind or removing the curtain entirely is so important. And we're going to get into all of that today. So, Kiona, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, as Kirsten said, my name is Kiona Nessenbaum, and I am a mother of three. I am a wife to my high school sweetheart, and I also am a birth doula, a birth assistant, as well as a former student midwife. There's a lot that goes into that, into like being a former student midwife and like what got me to work as a birth worker. But in present day, I'm a stay-at-home parent that is very driven, who also has a podcast. So my podcast is called Birth as We Know It. And Birth as We Know It is a podcast that's dedicated to recognizing the many different ways that birth unfolds. And the way that I do that on the podcast is interviewing people just like Kirsten and I are interviewing right now. And we talk about birth and what their birth experience or story was like. And the thing that makes my podcast a little bit different than other birth podcasts is I interview not just the birthing person, but I also interview partners, birth workers, providers, and more. Like, for example, I shared my three birth stories on my podcast, but the fourth episode is my daughter's perspective of the births because she was present at them. Of course, she was present at her own, but she was present at four
Harder to
years old.
remember those ones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But she was present at her little brother's birth, and then she was 4 at that time. But when she was 8, she actually decided that she wanted to catch her youngest sister. So she was 8 years old when she was in the birth pool with me, and we go into details of what it's like in her 9-year-old mind at the time, and dive into it. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And
So,
I'm
so, so
super
cool.
excited to be here.
Yeah, yeah, I'm like really excited to talk about this today. Um, well, gosh, where do we start? I would love to talk a little bit about what some of the like maybe the misconceptions or like the reasons why we tend to kind of like shy away from like stories in your perspective. Like obviously there's a reason why both of us are feeling the need to share more about the birthing experience. But in your perspective, is there are there like some common reasons why you see people tend to like shy away or shift away from hearing more about like birth and labor and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I knew exactly where you were going with this question. I'm like
Okay.
jittery and anxious over here because
Yeah,
I just
okay,
want to
good.
tell it all. um, so I think the reason why people hold back on telling and sharing their birth stories is because they're afraid of what people will think and they're afraid of being alone. And what I mean by that is someone could go through something during their labor or birth, even during their pregnancy, and even all the way back to their conception. Like how someone conceives is not common for some, and what I mean by that
Yeah.
is babies come in so many different ways. Sometimes it's on accident. Sometimes people are trying. Sometimes people are trying and have a loss. Sometimes people decide, I want to be a single parent, but I still want a kid. So what are my options? So there's IVF, there's IUI, there's so many different things. Um,
Yeah.
IUI is intrauterine insemination, and IVF is intra in it, that thing. Um, just for the listeners,
Yeah.
in vitro fertilization,
Yeah.
sorry.
You got it.
So that all of the ways in which people get to have a baby in their arms is so different. And when people feel like they're going to be alone on that journey, because
Mm.
when you're in that journey, for example, let's talk about loss, right? When someone has an early miscarriage, even though it's super common, people are hesitant to talk about it unless it's with someone they're close to or they don't tell anybody at all. And there's that misconception of, oh, this is only happening to me. No
Mm.
one's going to understand. and just thinking about how that you telling someone that you had a loss, what their reaction is gonna be.
Mhm.
Like, are they gonna say, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," or are they gonna say, "Girl, me too," you know?
Mhm.
So what's actually gonna come, and it's the unknown that makes that scary. And the unknown aspect also goes into what birth actually looks like and the decisions people make when they're giving birth. Like the birth is completely unknown. Like how it actually plays out is completely unknown. So I hope I answered your question, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Gosh, we can take that so many different ways.
yeah.
The unknown, I think, is where there's so much possibility, but also it's the scariest.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know, actually, I haven't completely told my story. I think one of the reasons why I've held back a little bit was that, especially when I was pregnant, I was trying to avoid some of the, like, really traumatic stories, but I seemed also to be a magnet for them.
Hmm. That is
And I
one of the
had this.
biggest things. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead, go ahead. You
No,
said
I
that's
would
one of the
let
biggest
you.
things.
You go ahead. Okay. I'll just say this really quick.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things is when people become pregnant, everybody around them that has been pregnant before decides that that is the time to say, "Don't let this happen to you. This happened to me,"
Yeah.
and, like, all of their horror stories, and the possibility of positive stories comes through, but that is less likely than all the horror stories. So,
Yeah.
sorry, I
Yeah,
apologize. I
no,
didn't mean to
that's
cut you off.
absolutely no, that no, it's great. That that is actually that's absolutely it. And so what I had to do is make a very conscious effort to, like, find the positive and to find all of the, like, really cool stories, where
Mhm,
people had either healed their birth trauma, like any sort of trauma that came up for them. It was like starting to find people who had done that,
mhm,
or had really just processed a lot of their birth experience and labor experience, that then they were able to talk about how they grew and how expansive it was, and just what sort of a journey it was for them. Um, but it's challenging sometimes to be able to find that, because it's just not very common that people have looked back at their birth and labor story and seen, and just at least dealt with any of the things that maybe didn't quite go the way they wanted them to. And from what I've been hearing, is
mhm.
that is what birth is like,
Yeah,
generally just kind of like flowing with whatever happens, and you don't always know what that's going to look like. Um, but anyway, that I found that to be one of the bigger and most challenging pieces on the pregnancy side, at least. And
mhm,
actually, one of the reasons why I've held back from sharing my own story, which I will get there, but, for now, that was just one thing that I was just cautious about, was sharing my own story, just
yeah.
because it definitely did not go the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah, yeah, and there are so many other people excuse me, there are so many other people out there that feel the exact same way as you.
Mhm,
Like, I have so many people that have come up and I had the opportunity to interview that were so hesitant to share. I've
mhm,
even talked to people that are still hesitant, but one day is thinking about it because the way that things happen for each person, like and what's traumatizing for someone isn't necessarily traumatizing for the next, you
oh,
know?
absolutely,
So, in
absolutely.
there's so much that you can do during your pregnancy, even preconception, to, like, help you prepare as much as possible for labor and birth, but at the same time, I am the person that will tell you straight up 99% of birth plans do not go as planned. So, I'm a strong believer that it's birth preferences and you have to have wiggle room. You have to be able to adjust to what is thrown at you in that space of the unknown.
Yep.
So, it's so, so, so challenging and, it's very vulnerable to talk about. So, I understand why people hold back sharing their stories.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of the things that was kind of r well, I am a planner. So I tried to plan for all of the different scenarios of all of the different things that could happen, but what I realized afterwards was that was my way of trying to control a situation that is very much so uncontrollable.
Mhm.
Um, Looking back now, I think there is the side of it that is focused on what you want to create, but there's also the space for allowing for things to unfold the way they're going to. There's a
Mhm.
different type of energy there of like a flow, I think it's if we were to talk about the energies of like the masculine and feminine energies that are not like gender specific, but like in those energies, it's a very feminine thing to be able to like go internally and open up and receive.
Mhm.
It's a very, very different space than the like to-dos of the things of like, okay, when this happens, we do this. And when this happens, we do this. It's different. And that was one thing that was very, very clear to me in the experience that you have to that I realized at the time and was not prepared for that you really do have to allow for it to just kind of happen in that sense. You can't control for all of the different factors.
Yeah.
It's a big one for me.
There's definitely no control there,
Yeah.
which is really hard. And one of the main reasons why there's not any control is because we are animals and giving birth is a very primal thing. It is something that we just do, and our bodies are supposed to be expected to just do. But if you think about the kind of animals that we are very conscious and we are very aware of the decisions that we're making, and we have a
Yeah.
hope for where that decision takes us. And because we have that intention behind the way that we think, and I was listening to one of your previous episodes where you were talking about the utilizing the conscious mind and all
Yeah.
of these things that we do subconsciously. And when we do those things subconsciously, we don't think, like, about it anymore. So,
Mhm.
birth is something that we can't and don't necessarily have the option to think about every single way to prepare for the contraction that's coming up, or to literally physically think of our cervix as it's opening in contractions. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can
Yeah.
visualize and we can put intention behind our visualizations, like, you know, there are a lot of birth workers or people out there that will utilize hypnobirthing. That is very psychological. That is something that you intentionally do with your body to prepare. And
Yeah.
there's different layers of it. There's the psychological aspect of it, there's the physical aspect, and there's the emotional. Everything comes into play. And so that's why it's such a challenging time to try and control.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah, we're just animals and we gotta let our animalistic things take over, and it's really hard for people to I don't really like the term "let go,"
Mhm.
but it's really hard for people to succumb to that, to embrace that.
Yeah, it's a little more of a um oh, what's the word? It is a vulnerable place. It is also a surrendering.
Yeah.
Like not
Mhm.
necessarily letting go, but a surrendering.
Yeah, that's a really good word to use.
Yeah. And that was such a big thing I had like that labor in and of itself is a very, very big practice and you do at some point come face to face with everything
Mhm.
that is
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
And learning to really surrender. I remember a moment, this was right before I was learning that my daughter was in distress, basically,
Mm,
and so
mhm,
we had to make some decisions that were not the way that we were hoping or planning for it to go, and I remember this moment that just, like, kind of fell over me that was like, this is it." Like, this is
mm,
it was like a very calm, peaceful place of just knowing, like, this is literally what is going to happen. There This is the end of what I thought this was going to be, and now we are starting this new journey of what this next piece is going to be, which was when I had my C-section, and there's just this moment, though, of just seeing what was going on the screens and listening to the OB, and I was like, "Okay,
mhm,
this
mhm.
is there is no more," like, I just knew it, and I looked at my husband and was like, this I know what we wanted, and, like, there's I can't explain it in any other way of just feeling that deep surrender at that moment of like, "Okay, that's
Yeah.
it.
And
This is
it's
it."
yeah, I agree, and the term surrender also is followed very closely by the term trust,
Yeah,
because you have to trust yourself, you
yeah,
have to trust that you're safe, you have to trust your providers, you have to trust your partner in knowing, like, that they're not gonna freak out or,
yeah,
you just have to
yeah,
trust. So
yeah.
it's like surrender and trust and vulnerability.
Mhm,
So, yeah, I
mhm.
hear you for sure on that.
Yeah. I'd love to speak a little bit to when things don't really go the way we want to. Like you
Mhm,
mentioned, what were the words you used? Speaking a little bit to like the when our body doesn't do what we think it's like what it's supposed to do.
mhm,
I think from this perspective, and I'll kind of frame this a little bit, but like from after my C-section, I definitely recognized feelings of and beliefs of that like my body didn't do what it was supposed to do. And that I've kind of felt betrayed in a sense of like this was not how I envisioned this going. And I have all sorts of tools and ways in which I've like worked through a lot of those things, but I think that that was one thing that was not talked about really at all beforehand that then
mhm,
all of a sudden afterwards, I spoke with so many women who also had C-sections because they heard a little bit of my story. And that's when all of those things started to come out. And I was like, okay, so here we go. We've like lifted the curtain because now we're on the other side. And now I'm seeing all of these things that, that women had not talked about, prior to that. And I found
mhm.
it so fascinating because, I clearly was not the only one. I was not alone in that feeling and in that those beliefs that kind of came up there.
Mhm.
Um, can we speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many directions where we can go with that because it it's like we can go as deep as the fact that birth is very primal, like we said, but birth today, you have options, right? I am not against hospital birth. I am not against home birth. Like birth, the way that birth is available now is important, right? Hospital saves lives for sure. But I
Yep,
will say that um depending on the provider that you have, depending on the team, like the birth team that you have, there are a lot of things that have the opportunity to be toggled
yep,
or messed with. So it starts with, having that trust, but when it comes to the aftermath of having those feelings of, "Oh my gosh, my body didn't do what it was supposed to, like, why can't I just do this? Like, I should be able to do this, like, what's wrong with me?" Right? Those
yep,
are thoughts that people have. People have those thoughts even when they have a vaginal birth, even when they have an unmedicated birth, even when they have the birth that they desire. Those thoughts still come up because things don't always go as planned. And like I said, 99% of the time, things don't go as planned. So
mhm,
when those thoughts do come up, the way that I would come at it from like a birth doula perspective
yeah,
is to talk to my client and say, all of it, like, first off, this is not your fault. Second, there are so many moving parts that you did not have control over,
right,
right? And when you, depending on the setting that you give birth in, there are people that don't understand what physiological birth is. And so when you start messing with something to say, things aren't happening fast enough, let's put some pit in there. Or,
yep,
oh, like, let's go ahead and do this induction because X, Y, and Z. Like, of course, if it's necessary medically to save lives, absolutely. We do not want mom or babe or birthing person or babe to be at risk, right? Um, that's why it's beneficial to have those things in place, but I will say that those things are also taken advantage of,
oh,
in,
absolutely,
like, a negative sense of saying, "Alright, I wanna make it to Thanksgiving with my family, let's speed this up." So,
yeah,
I guess the thing that I'm trying to say here is when the natural physiological aspect of birth is messed with, it gives that much more of an opportunity for things to go awry,
yep,
and especially when it's not necessary,
Mhm.
right, to mess
Mhm.
with those things.
Oh,
But
I'm so
go
glad
ahead.
we're talking about this. No,
Yeah.
I'm just so glad we're talking about this because it's like keep going. Finish out your thought there. I'll jump in.
Okay. Um, I don't know where my thought was going
Oh,
anymore.
I'm so
No, it's
sorry.
fine. No, it's okay. I was ending it anyways to just basically say that, yeah, when you mess with things, sometimes things don't go as planned, so
Yeah, I'm 1,000%. The reason why I'm so excited that we're talking about it is my original plan was to be in a birthing center,
mhm,
and to do it all unmedicated if that was going to be possible. Um, and then I ended up having preeclampsia and
mm,
was immediately, admitted and induced. And then I did go 24 hours without medication, but then it still was just wasn't quite going the way that we were
mhm,
wanting it to go. It was taking a lot of time.
mhm,
Um, so it's great to get to hear, like, both sides of that, because and from my perspective, wanted to, not mess with it as much as
mhm,
possible, but for my part of it, just because of also the preeclampsia side, which was went undetected, to be fair. It went undetected because, it was just, like, something that then just, like, happened. It was like my body
mhm.
was like, "No, okay, we're done."
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm,
Um, and so that's where some of those interventions did come into play, and it was just so wild to me because there was a cascade of things that I was looking to avoid, but all of those things just sort of, like, ended up happening, and,
mhm,
um I think it's important to talk to both sides of that because, like, as much as I wanted the unmessed with as much as possible experience, I got something entirely different.
mhm,
So I think I'm just so excited to have the conversation around it because I also think too that I know this because as I was going through this journey, so many women were talking to me and they were like, why would you want to do it unmedicated? Why would you
mm,
want to not do it in a hospital? Like, what do you mean? It's like,
mhm,
well, what I mean is that there is an entirely other experience that's possible here, that is really it has the opportunity to be really, really different than what you
mhm,
experience in the hospital, and I was just so very interested and intrigued by
mhm.
that experience, but, you know,
Yeah.
birth stories, they're
Yeah.
uncontrollable.
Yeah, they really are, they really are, and just, like, to touch on your point of where you said, your intended plan was to be in a birth center and end up at a hospital setting and, like, go unmedicated, and then your body shifted to make it to where you had to have a hospital birth, but that goes to point out why hospitals are so important
Yep.
to be able to have this opportunity, like, if you were in a place where you did not have the hospital birth as an option, there is a huge chance that you nor your baby would be here right now,
Right.
right? And so having that as an option is super important. And the fact that it was able to be caught in time for you to have a safe birth is also important.
Yep.
Or I'm not going to put the word safe on your birth because I don't know your whole story. I don't know if you felt safe in your birth, but you and your baby came out of it. But the way that you view that is a word that you get to place yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so, and the tricky part here is when you start with interventions, it kind of snowballs. There's a really, really high chance that it's going to snowball unless you do a crazy amount of research prior for all of the option or all of the potential options of ways in which you'll be induced,
Right.
right? But who has
Mm.
time for that? Not
True.
many people.
True.
So, um, yeah.
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 Nor necessarily like I mean, I would say I did quite a lot of it, but
Mhm.
I also have a background to be able to sort through a lot of those things, so
Right,
it's
mhm,
different, the resources wise. Um, it I that's also another reason why I find it very intriguing as far as like what actually did unfold and what happened. Um, 'Cause I did have the opportunity, to like look into a lot of those.
Mhm.
possibilities.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it just goes to show too, just like you can be as prepared as you think you are or can be, or to the brim of prepared, and then still have it be something that is just different.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, and I've interviewed both midwives and nurses on my podcast about, like, they're in birth all the time. That is
Mhm.
their job. That is what they do, and then they give birth themselves, and it does not go as planned. They are providers. They are supporters, and the things that you think wouldn't happen to them happened, and it's like, birth doesn't save the quote, unquote, "good births" for people that know what birth is, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it just happens,
Yeah.
totally unplanned and
Yeah.
unexpected, and a surrender is for real.
Mhm. What a beautiful experience though too, that
Mhm,
it does get to be unique to each and every birthing person and mom, as well as the kiddo too. I mean,
mhm,
that was another perspective that was given to me that I thought was really cool, was that afterwards I was like, dealing with the healing of all of the things that happened, and the perspective that thankfully was given to me also was, well, what if this was also the way that this, like, your kiddo was meant to come into the world, like this
mhm,
was her experience that she needed to have for whatever reason. There is that, also that possibility that this is very specific to her as well. It's not just about your experience and your sacrifice and your, you know, pieces of that. There might be
mhm,
also this other experience here too that needs to be considered. And I was like, oh, okay.
mhm. Yeah, it
It's so
it
true.
it's so true. Yeah, it takes 2 to tango, you know, there are 2 individual humans that partake in the labor process. So, um, yeah, that is totally true, which is why, I go in and talk about things like I primarily obviously am talking to people that have birthed people or birthed individuals themselves, like have given birth, but I'm not like interviewing my mom and asking her, "How was it for you to be born? Have you talked to grandma?" Like, I'm talking to the person who has given birth. So,
Right.
um, but I will say that when situations happen to where things potentially don't go as planned, baby has the potential to get injured and things like that, that birth impacts how they live their life,
Yeah.
right? And if there's birth defects that they're born with, like I just talked to someone recently, I was at a conference and I was talking to him, and I won't mention his name, but he had told me that he was born with a birth defect to where he has tubal lungs. And I was like, "I have never heard of this before. What does that mean?" And he said that his lungs basically go from, like, just below his collarbone to the top of his waistband, and it's like they're tubal instead of, like, the normal shape, and that impacted, like, the activities that he could do throughout his life. He couldn't be super athletic, and I was like, "Wow, I didn't even know that." So, um, it's just interesting the things you can learn from people when you actually listen to their stories.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of power in different people's experiences and the way that they have both seen and experienced the world, for sure.
Mhm.
That's why I love
Mhm.
these podcasts. They're so
Yeah.
fun. They're so fun. I get to hear so many stories, and I love that these are also great platforms for people to tell their stories, which is exactly like what you're doing on your podcast, which I'm just like so excited about. And I
Mhm.
want people to know more about it, because the more we normalize and recognize the way that birth happens, then it just opens up the possibilities for so many more women to kind of just see that, like, you're not alone. This is
Mhm.
normal. This is just how it goes. And can we learn to embrace all of it as what it is, instead of it being like taboo, or like having some sort of fear around talking more about what happens inside of birth and labor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I agree with you 100%.
Love it.
Which is yeah, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and yeah, being a mom is what pulled me into this field, of course,
Yeah.
and just I learn so much from other people when I'm interviewing them. I absolutely learn so much. And even though I have experience, like I have experienced over 140 births as like a birth doula and student midwife and birth assistant. So like all of those roles combined, I've been to like just over 100. 140. So I've seen so many different things. Of course, there's a lot of similarities, but by no means would I even consider myself like an expert in this space because there's so much to learn. And
Mm.
there's so many people that have been to way more births than me. But the reason why I'm bringing this up at all is because each individual birth experience is totally unique in itself. Even between the person that has given birth 5 times, 6 times, 2 times, every birth is different, and I just love learning about it.
So
So, yeah.
is there like a piece of already this has been such an amazing wealth of like information and like so fun to get to explore a little bit more as far as like the differences in births. Is there anything like a word of like advice or suggestions or recommendations that you would give to someone who is maybe pregnant for the first time going into labor, but also maybe for the second or the third time? I think that's a whole other conversation too of, we've been through it once, but there are expectations of maybe how it's going to go, and then could be entirely and completely different the second or the third time. Are there anything that you wanna speak to there as far as even, like, that difference?
Yeah. First thing I will say to any pregnant person, whether it's the first time or the fifth time or whatever, consider having an advocate with you. So like a birth doula or
Yeah.
even a partner. Also know that birth doulas are not just hired for the birthing person, they can be hired for your partner to help reassure that everything that's happening is okay, or kind of just be that middle person to level things out between like medical jargon and layman's terms. So that's super awesome, and I would say consider that.
Mm.
And the second thing that I would say is childbirth education is really awesome. And you want to make sure that you get childbirth education from the proper place in which you can absorb it. And what I mean by that is there are so many different childbirth education sources out there. There's online, there's in person, but there's also some childbirth courses that are geared specifically towards like queer folks or
Yeah.
specifically towards hospital birthers or specifically towards home birth or birth center birth. So find the one that works best for you and just do your research. I know that sounds super vague, but do the research that you think fits you best, but you know you best. So don't overwhelm yourself, but do the best that you can to help educate yourself and your partner or anybody else that's going to be in your space. And if people are going to be in your space, give them a job. Like if your mom is going to come support you when you're giving birth, have her be the water giver, you know, have her be the snack giver. Like just so she has a job and it doesn't feel like you're putting on some kind of show, because that is not a place to do any kind of performance or to hold back your feelings. A lot of people say, bring someone into your space that you would be open to watching you have sex and have an orgasm because you're going to be naked and making all the noises. So,
Yeah.
it's just one way to think about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Mm.
hopefully I answered your question,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's
that's lovely.
so much more that could be said, but
I know there and a lot no, gosh, on all these podcasts, I feel like I could usually talk for hours.
mhm, yeah.
Um, yeah, well, I thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Like anything else that you're like super passionate about or like interested in talking about right now? Just because I want to make sure that we explore all of those great things. There's so many different avenues we could obviously go, but is there anything
Mhm.
else that's been sort of like top of mind that you're excited about?
Oh man. I mean, okay, I'll say one thing is being a mom of 3 and continuing to hold myself as an individual in my passions
Mm,
is hugely important. And I just want to give a shout out to your other episode that you did. It's called How to Thrive in Life and Business with Coach Megan Barrett. I
yeah,
just listened to that and I was like, oh my God, this is like my life. I feel this. So yeah. And the reason why I bring that up is because Birth as We Know It is my podcast, but it's definitely like a super strong passion of mine. And yes, kids is what got me into realizing that passion, but I'm the one that's pushing me forward in that passion, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So, for all the parents out there, continue to love yourself. And there was this one quote that I saw. I don't even know who said it, but it was in a video, and it said, "You taking care of yourself as a parent is not saying me first, but it's saying me too." And so
Yeah.
I think that that's awesome, and it sits with me. So, yeah.
Love that. What is one way if there was one thing that helped you the most as far as not necessarily like losing yourself in motherhood, so like finding yourself through that journey, what's one or two things that you feel like has been really helpful for you? The me too, right? Like versus
Mhm.
me them first or me first, me too. Anything else that has been like super helpful for you or fun to get to kind of see how you've shifted or changed through motherhood?
Yeah, I would say, ooh, there's I'm, like, trying to think of, like, what should I talk about? Um,
Yeah.
just finding something that you love, like, and being okay with the fact that you're still a person outside of being a parent, um, and doing that by doing what you love and knowing it's okay. I mean, I know that's so repetitive, I just said that in 2 different ways, but yeah, I would say find friends that are just your own. Like, right now, my husband and I, we're high school sweethearts, so we most of our friends are friends that we developed together going
Sure.
from high school, but I recently found, my own group of friends. There are 2 special individuals, I call them my Ps because we met at a conference,
Oh.
and I have talked to them every day since I've left this conference, and they're like my friends, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I have friends, like, people like me." It's okay for me to have my own friends and for my husband to not be attached at all, and that's
Yeah.
new for me, and I'm embracing it, and I love it, and they, like me for me. They met me prior to knowing that I was married with 3 kids, and of course, that's, like, one of the first things I talk about, but they met me for me, they didn't meet me through anybody else, and so that was nice, find your own friends.
Yeah. That's a great reminder for sure,
Yeah,
that like,
yeah,
especially in having friends that are I would speak to that for sure, it's just having friends that are not that can remind you that you are someone that is not just a mom or not
right,
just whatever, because and even in that, like, maybe even removing just as the word, but that you are a mom and that you are, doing so many amazing things with
mhm,
your career and what you're up to, podcasts, etcetera.
yeah,
But yeah, like having friends that remind you that you're more than the things that we do and the roles that we play is just great. Such
yeah,
a fun thing. And especially too, and I can totally relate to that, as far as having friends who are like the combined friend
mhm,
circle. It's
right.
a
And
little
it's
bit
good to
different.
have that too. It's good to
Yep.
have the combined circle, because it makes it easier for you to do things as a couple and as a family,
Yep.
but when you want to, like, step away and just be
Mhm.
yourself, not that you can't be yourself in that circle, but when
Different.
you just wanna do you, the
Yeah.
different version of you,
Yeah.
um, be with your friends.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love that. That's such a great I love I just it's a good reminder for me too. I'm gonna reach out to some of my friends today.
Do it, you totally
Show them
should.
some gratitude.
Yeah,
Amazing. Well, gosh, thank you so much, Kiona, for coming on today. This was so much fun to get to talk about and just even getting to talk a little bit about my own, giving me a reason or just to talk about my own birth experience. Maybe get that cart rolling a little bit. I
yeah,
really appreciate you being here and for everything that you are doing. I will have the links to all of your stuff in the show notes. Obviously to your podcast. Is there anything else, anywhere else that you would like people to know about, like what you're up to or where they can find you? Anything like that?
yeah. First thing I wanna say is if you ever do wanna share your birth story on a platform, you're more than welcome to share on my podcast.
Thanks.
The offer will always be open, and if people want to find me or share their own birth stories, they can go to my website, which is birthasweknowitpodcast.com, and you can find all the episodes, you can find more about me and all that stuff, so, yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, all those links will be in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We appreciate all of you. If you found something really helpful or like a perspective shift from this episode, like please come find either of us and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day, weekend, whenever you're listening to this, and we will see you for the next episode. Take care.